Some people enter the world as if they never truly belonged here, quiet, humble, and invisible among the noisy crowds. Nia Forrester was one of those people. To others, she was just a faint name on the endless list of students at Toledo Central High School. A skinny black girl who always sat in the back of the classroom near the window, hoodie pulled low over her frizzy hair, eyes cast downward, clutching an old violin like a treasure. No one paid her any attention, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Nia had no close friends, belonged to no group at school. She didn't join clubs, didn't sit at the popular kids' lunch tables, didn't laugh loudly or make small talk during breaks. Even the sound of her footsteps in the hallway seemed to mute itself. To the world around her, she was a shadow, an easy-to-ignore presence. But inside her, there was an entire symphony yet to be heard. A childhood of unspoken things. Nia was born in the west side of Toledo, a neighborhood that wasn't the worst, but no one would ever call it good. Run-down buildings, apartment hallways damp with mold and coated in green moss during the rainy season, that was the backdrop of her early years. Her mother, Monica Forrester, worked night shifts cleaning offices, coming home just as the sun began to rise. Her father was never around, and Nia never asked. They lived in a small third-floor apartment with only 2 bedrooms, one for her mom, one for Nia and her little brother Miles. The space was cramped, the neighbor's TV blared through the walls, and car horns pierced the night. But amidst that chaos, there was one sound that saved Nia from feeling completely swallowed, the sound of a violin. The first violin she ever saw belonged to her grandfather, a quiet man with salt and pepper hair and eyes that seemed to speak. He played blues on an old, battered violin with strings on the verge of breaking, but the sound it made was strangely warm. He once told her, "Music doesn't have to be beautiful. It just has to be true." She didn't understand it at the time, but when he passed away when she was 9, the emptiness left behind was something only music could fill. The violin, an extension of her being. The violin Nia carried to school every day wasn't flashy. Its case was scratched, the zipper barely held. The strings were cheap replacements from a thrift shop. Sometimes, the bow only had a few intact hairs left. But to her, it was her soul, her second body, the only voice she could trust to express herself. Every afternoon after school, while her mother prepared for another long night of work and Miles played in the corner or slept, Nia would take out her violin and play, no speakers, no headphones. She'd stuff a cloth in the door crack so the neighbors wouldn't hear, so no one would bang on the wall in protest. But she knew her mother listened, through the thin walls, through the extended silence, and in those 3 soft knocks, the signal that she should play that part again. Practicing wasn't a chore, it was a ritual, a private journey she walked each day. The wavering notes when her mood was off, the pounding rhythms when she was angry, and the silences between notes that only the truly lonely could understand. The violin was her language, one that needed no translation. The invisible girl in school life. At school, Nia was only known as the girl with the violin, or that quiet black girl. She wasn't called on during group work, never picked for sports teams, never asked, "What do you think?" But Nia didn't mind. She was used to walking lightly, speaking softly, and existing as if she didn't exist. In class, she always chose the seat farthest back, avoiding any spotlight. She never raised her hand, even when she knew the answer. She ate lunch alone, in the library corner or under the tree behind the gym. Sometimes people tried to talk to her, but after a few awkward exchanges, they left, saying, "She's kind of weird." The irony was, people loved to talk about diversity and inclusion, but when faced with a silent black girl holding a violin and living in her own world, they chose to look away. Silence is not weakness. There's a dangerous misconception many people carry, that the quiet ones are easy to defeat. That those who don't speak up have nothing to say. But the truth is, sometimes, silence is the most powerful form of strength. Nia didn't need to shout to prove herself. She didn't need to respond when mocked or pitted. She let it all flow past, like a river, quiet but unstoppable. Her strength lay in knowing exactly who she was and what belonged to her. Even if the whole world ignored her, she would return to her small room, open her violin case, and play music only she could understand. No audience needed. No applause required. Just truth. A small world, a vast soul. If anyone ever stepped into Nia's world, dim yellow light, a creaky fan, and violin notes floating through the night, they'd understand that she needed nothing more than space to breathe and sound to live. Each piece she played was a diary entry, not written in words, but in emotion. Nia wasn't an extrovert, but she wasn't shy. She didn't need to perform because she was building a deep, rich inner world where she could simply be herself, undefined by others. She didn't see solitude as misfortune. To her, solitude was freedom, time to listen, to practice, to compose, to touch the deepest layers of herself undisturbed by the noise of society. An unnamed star. Before everything changed, Nia Forrester was just someone everyone had seen, but never truly noticed. A song left unplayed. A blank page unwritten. A story unheard. But a star is still a star, no matter where it shines, even if no one looks up. And one day, it will shine, not to be admired, but to fulfill its own destiny. For Nia, that destiny lived in the old case she carried every day, a silent yet sharp weapon. And she was ready. Even if her name had never been spoken correctly, even if no one had ever asked her to take the stage, she practiced as if the concert hall was waiting. It was a regular afternoon, just like any other, during the 5th period at Toledo Central High. Mr. Buckley, the gym teacher, stepped into the classroom. Though he had no direct connection to the arts department, he had been assigned to coordinate the upcoming school talent show. With a half-joking tone, he announced, "Anyone got a special talent? Sign up. Singing, dancing, magic, anything, as long as you can perform." The class remained mostly indifferent, until Ms. Dorsey, the notoriously strict and condescending math teacher, unexpectedly chimed in. She turned toward the corner where Nia Forrester sat and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "And what about the little violin girl? She's been carrying that case all year, maybe it's time to show us what she can actually do?" The class erupted in laughter. No one expected Nia to respond. In their eyes, she was just the quiet girl who kept her head down and always sat in the back with her old violin. A few students started imitating screechy violin sounds, someone even made cat noises. A wave of mocking rippled through the room. Mr. Buckley chuckled along, unaware of the damage behind the laughter. He added, "Yeah, Nia. Show us how good you are." Ms. Dorsey smiled, that fake, patronizing smile, as if she had just offered some well-meaning encouragement. But Nia didn't smile. She simply sat still, gripping the violin case between her knees. A few seconds of silence passed. Then, unexpectedly, she looked up and spoke in a steady, quiet voice. "I'll participate." The room fell completely silent. Mr. Buckley blinked in surprise, stumbling over his words. You're serious?" Nia didn't say another word. She simply picked up her pen, took the sign-up sheet being passed around, and wrote down her name. No eye contact, no explanations. Just 3 words, Nia Forrester. The atmosphere in the classroom turned awkward. Some students were shocked. Others smirked quietly, assuming she was just trying to be brave. But to those who paid closer attention, like Ms. Dorsey, it was clear, the look in Nia's eyes wasn't hesitation. It was quiet resolve. After school, laughter still echoed through the halls. A few students whispered, "She'll probably play 'Mary Had a Little Lamb' and burst into tears. God, if she snaps a string on stage, that'll be chef's kiss hilarious." They still thought it was a joke. A disaster in the making. Something to record and post online. But what they didn't realize was that with the simple words, "I'll participate," Nia hadn't just agreed to perform on stage. She had accepted the challenge of facing an entire world that had once chosen to ignore her, armed with nothing but the sound of her violin. After writing her name on the performance list, Nia didn't tell anyone. She didn't need anyone to know. But from that day on, her routine changed entirely, not because she wanted to stand out, but because she needed to be ready. Every day after school, Nia went straight home. No snacks, no scrolling on social media. The first thing she did was open her violin case. The instrument was old, its strings worn, the tuning pegs loose, and the bow frayed like a shoelace about to snap. But she played anyway, because it was all she had. The small apartment she shared with her mother and younger brother had no soundproofing. To avoid disturbing the neighbors, Nia stuffed towels into the door cracks, taped paper to the walls, and kept the volume as low as she could. But the sound of her violin still resonated, not loud, but deep. Her mother, Monica, often stood outside her door, listening through the thin wall. She never entered while Nia was playing. But if Nia missed a beat or hit a sour note, her mother would tap lightly on the wall 3 times. That was the signal, do it again. No scolding. No criticism. Just a gentle reminder, you can do better. That was how her mother taught her patience, through silence and listening. Nia didn't practice a famous piece. She didn't choose something easy just to score points. Instead, she composed her own music, a blend of classical and blues, of sorrow and hope. No title, no formula. Just the truest emotion she had. At first, she could only string together a few notes. Slowly, she pieced together sections, then passages. Some nights, she played until her hands went numb, the strings leaving deep grooves in her fingers. Sometimes, she had to retune the violin 3 times in a single session. But she never complained. Occasionally, her little brother Miles would sit at the doorway, watching her practice. He once asked, "Are you going to win?" "I don't know," Nia replied, never stopping. "Why don't you play something happy? Everything you play sounds sad." Nia gave a small smile. "Some happy songs sound like sad ones." Miles didn't get it. But he nodded and ran off. Those evenings, Nia wasn't just practicing. She was preparing herself to face the world. She knew people were still laughing behind her back. That some were waiting for her to fail. But that didn't stop her from trying. One night, when Monica came home from her night shift, she found Nia asleep on the floor, the violin beside her like a close friend. She picked up a damp cloth and gently wiped her daughter's hands, whispering, "Don't push yourself too hard. Your hands might get damaged." Half asleep, Nia mumbled, "It's okay. I have to be ready." Her mother didn't say more. She simply placed a hand on Nia's shoulder and softly said, "If you really want to do this, then do it right. Don't let others speak for you. Let your music say it all." In the days that followed, no one saw Nia in her usual spots around school. She wasn't reading under the tree or scrolling through her phone. She was quietly practicing, each day, a little more, one section at a time. Not to impress. But to speak a truth that words couldn't capture. She didn't want fame. She only wanted, just this once, for people to truly listen. The day of the talent show arrived faster than Nia had expected. Friday. The stage had been hastily set up inside the school gymnasium, the same space used for PE classes and year-end ceremonies. Plastic fold-out chairs, dim yellow lighting, and old wooden floors that creaked with every movement. That morning, Nia didn't eat much. Just a slice of dry toast and a glass of water. Her hands trembled slightly, her wrists sore from countless nights of practice. But she didn't complain. Instead of playing her violin, she stretched her fingers, closed her eyes, and breathed slowly. Her mind was blank, as if clearing space for the music. At school, the atmosphere was buzzing. Students gathered around the bulletin board, excitedly pointing at the lineup. Her name stood at number 16. Nia Forrester, violin, original. Some students squinted. Who's Nia Forrester? Oh, you know, that black girl who always carries a violin around. Wait, she's actually performing? Get your phones ready, this is gonna be a disaster. Laughter again. More whispers. But Nia, as always, walked past them. No glances, no reaction. Though inside, she heard every word. And remembered. During lunch break, Mr. Buckley passed the basketball court and saw Nia tuning her violin alone. You ready, Forrester? He asked. Nia looked up at him with a blank expression, then returned to adjusting the strings. No answer. None was needed. The question was unnecessary. In the teacher's lounge, Ms. Dorsey glanced at the performance list and scoffed. Honestly, who even let that girl sign up? She signed up herself, said Ms. Tran, the art teacher. She has just as much right as anyone else. Sure, but she should know her limits. I mean, who does she think she is? Maybe she'll surprise you, Ms. Tran replied, casually filling in a crossword puzzle. Ms. Dorsey said nothing more. But the look in her eyes made it clear, she didn't believe Nia was capable of anything other than failure. That afternoon at home, Nia sat beside her mother. The violin rested on the bed. Her mother, dressed in her work uniform, turned to her and asked. You sure about this? I said I'd perform, Nia answered. You know you don't have to prove anything to anyone, right? I'm not doing it for them, Nia said, gazing up at the cracked ceiling. Then softly. I'm doing it for me. Her mother smiled, pulled her close, and hugged her tight. Then do it right, baby. When you walk on that stage, make them listen. Backstage, moments before the show, Nia sat quietly with her violin across her lap. Around her, other students chatted, laughed, fixed their makeup, tested microphones. But she stayed still. She knew exactly who her audience was. They were the ones who had looked down on her. Classmates who turned their backs. Teachers who made her name the punchline of a joke. And tonight, they were all here. Number 16. Her name was called. No applause. Just shuffling noises, whispering. She's up. Don't break the stage, violin girl. Someone record this for TikTok. Laughter bubbled through the crowd. But Nia no longer heard it. In her mind, only 3 sentences remained. Play for yourself. Fear no one. Make them listen. She took a deep breath. And walked out onto the stage. When Nia Forrester's name was announced, the gym remained mostly indifferent. A few scattered claps. A cough. The squeak of shoes against the old floor. Most students had their heads down, eyes glued to their phones. Some had their cameras ready, expecting what they believed would be a disaster. Nia walked onto the stage. She didn't speak. She didn't bow. She didn't smile. She simply raised her violin to her shoulder, bow in her right hand, and stood still under a single pale spotlight from above. A few students whispered. She's gonna cry, watch. Get ready for, Mary had a little lamb. But she no longer heard them. In her mind, there was only the music, the piece she'd practiced for hours in her small room, with peeling walls and dim light. She thought of her mother. Her little brother. Her grandfather, and his words. When you can't say it out loud, let the music speak for you. And then, she played. The first note floated into the room, thin and soft, like a breath. Someone giggled. She didn't stop. Second note. Third. The sound began to fill the space. By the fifth note, the gym had fallen completely silent. Nia's music was unlike anything they had heard. It wasn't from TikTok. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't designed to impress. It hurt. It was real. It was a story, told in a language without words. At first, the melody was gentle, like a conversation between past and present. Then it shifted, the bow bent with force, the strings trembled. The sound burst out like a scream long trapped inside a cage. Her left hand flew along the neck of the violin, her right arm drew the bow like it was carving scars into the air. Her eyes closed. Not in fear, but because she didn't need to see anyone. Everything she had to say was already in the motion. Down in the audience, no one moved. Those who had once laughed, now couldn't meet each other's eyes. Phones stopped recording, as if their holders forgot what they were doing. Mr. Buckley, who once chuckled, now stared, unblinking. Ms. Dorsey, who once mocked, now sat upright, hands tightly clasped, face unreadable. At the peak of the piece, Nia held one long, aching note. The room forgot to breathe. The sound cracked, soared, then slowly dissolved into something softer. Like pain giving way to healing. The final note didn't end abruptly. It faded, gently, as if warmth was evaporating into the air. She lowered the bow. Violin still close to her chest. No bow. No thank you. No smile. Just stillness, as if to say, I don't need your words. You just heard me, for the first time. Silence. 1 second. 2. Then, a single clap from the back of the room. Then another. And another. Until the entire gym erupted, not in whoops or cheers, but in applause. Real. Quiet. Reverent. Some students looked down at their phones, ashamed they had planned to laugh. Some stood up. Slowly, one by one, the entire audience rose to their feet. Some nodded. Some stayed quiet, because they knew they had just witnessed something far beyond what they'd expected. As Nia stepped off stage, Mr. Buckley gave her a silent nod, unable to speak. Ms. Dorsey watched her pass but said nothing. For the first time, she had no words, not because of shock, but because she didn't know how to respond to a silence louder than anything she'd ever heard. By the water station, Miss Tran, the art teacher, handed Nia a small folded note. Inside, a single line. When they don't expect you to shine, shine harder. Monday morning was overcast. The rain from the night before still lingered on the pavement and school steps. The air smelled of damp concrete, the kind of weather that made students feel sluggish, unmotivated. But that day, something was different. When Nia Forrester walked into school, things were no longer the same. No one scoffed at the violin in her hand. No whispers. No mocking behind her back. Only eyes that followed her as she passed. Some students stepped aside in the hallway, not out of fear, but respect. A few nodded quietly. Others whispered. That's her. I watched the video 3 times. Gave me chills. Nia said nothing. She didn't wear a triumphant smile. She simply walked as she always did, quietly, calmly. But everyone could feel it. They had finally seen her. Mr. Buckley stood near the gym, holding his phone like always. When he saw Nia pass, he gave a sheepish smile. Your performance Friday, it was really something. You did great, Forrester. Nia gave a small nod. No resentment. No warmth. Just a gesture that said, she no longer needed validation from those who once laughed. At the classroom door, Ms. Dorsey stood with a stack of graded papers in her arms. She paused as Nia approached. Then, for the first time, spoke without that usual condescension. "Nia, can we talk for a moment?" Nia stopped. "Last week, what I said, it wasn't right. I misjudged you. I shouldn't have assumed things based on what I thought I knew. I'm trying to do better. Anne. I'm sorry." Silence. Nia looked her straight in the eyes. She could have replied with something sharp. A clever jab. But instead, she simply said, "You should have seen me before Friday." Then turned and walked away. At lunch, as Nia sat at her usual table, a small carton of chocolate milk slid toward her from across the table. It was Malik, the boy who played piano, the only one who'd once asked her. "Original or popular piece?" He didn't say anything at first. Just smiled and nodded. Then added softly, "Next time, we do a duet?" Nia glanced at him, one brow slightly raised. "You're not ready." Malik burst out laughing. It was the first time Nia laughed out loud, small, but real. A few students looked up. For the first time, they heard the quiet girl's laughter. That afternoon, back home, Nia didn't rush to open her violin case. She sat on the couch, turned on the TV with the volume off, and watched cartoons with her little brother. Her mother peeked out from the kitchen and asked, "No practice today?" "No need. I'm okay today." "You okay?" "Yeah. Really okay." This story didn't end with a trophy. There were no news crews at the school gates. But the most important thing had happened. Nia was no longer a name people skipped over. She didn't need to be celebrated. She didn't need to be liked by everyone. She only needed one thing. That they had truly listened. And sometimes, just once, is enough to change everything. Violin. Not everyone changes after a performance. But some do. And sometimes, all it takes is for a few people to start listening, to make all the difference. If anyone has ever laughed at you, ever made you feel invisible, remember Nia Forrester. And never stop telling your story, in your own way. Not everyone is born to stand on a stage. Not everyone is handed the chance to shine. And some people, like Nia Forrester, have to earn the right to be heard, using nothing but their silence. Nia's story isn't just about music. It isn't just about a stunning performance. It's a reminder. Never let others decide your worth just because you're quiet, different, or don't fit their mold. Maybe you're the quiet one. The one who's overlooked. The one people call invisible. Maybe you've been mocked, dismissed, or laughed at, just because you carry something they don't understand. But that doesn't mean you're any less deserving of being seen. It doesn't mean your voice matters less. And it definitely doesn't mean you have to shrink yourself to fit someone else's narrow view. They say you're not good enough? Then practice until your silence stuns them. They laugh at your dreams? Let your results leave them speechless. They never expected you to shine? Then shine, in a way they'll never forget. Nia never tried to become someone else. She simply used what she had. An old violin. An untitled melody. And an unshakable belief that, if I play with all the truth in my heart, someone will listen. Violin. So if you're carrying a dream, no matter how quiet, how strange, how small, don't give up. Don't silence your music. Don't bury your voice. Tell your story. Live your truth. Play your song. And trust that one day, the world will go silent. Just to hear you. Some people won't see you, until you force them to listen. So play your truth anyway.